All right, welcome back. I'll be pacing a lot with my cell phone. It'll look like I'm doing things other than what I should be doing. I'm just looking at my slides. This is just more efficient than printing them out, so I'm not doing what I forbid you from doing, checking social media, etc. In class. All right, so last class I introduced you to a series of puzzles with regard to time travel. All the puzzles concerned logical possibility. There seemed to be something logically incoherent with the very concept of time travel. And that's worrying because, I mean, on the one hand, it's kind of interesting that there might be time travel. Physicists tell us that it's possible. And yet, if it's possible by the lights of physicists, then it should surely be at least logical. It shouldn't violate any law of logic. After all, physicists employ mathematics, and logic is a part of mathematics. Again, we'll talk a bit more about logic later on. So there's this kind of conundrum. We hear from one part of the university, time travel is a possibility, and yet we look at the logic of the phenomenon and it seems incoherent. So how can we sort this out? How can we make sense of it? All right, and so what we want to do is see if we can't unravel these logical problems. Now, some of you might be wondering, why time travel? Why start this course off this way? Well, if you don't care about time travel, that's fine. One of the benefits of studying the problems associated with time travel is that you learn a whole lot about philosophy. And this is a really efficient way of introducing you to a series of concepts and ways of thinking that we're going to be employing throughout the rest of the semester with topics that, well, I hope you have interest in independently. So spending the first week and a half on this really pays off down the road. All right. Of course, I think it's intrinsically interesting whether or not time travel is possible. So anyway. Some reminders. So first of all, each week you've got a certain set of readings that you've got to do. These are in your unit guide. Unfortunately, the unit guide, as compiled by the university software, buries the unit reading schedule in like page 18 of the unit guide. So that's unhelpful. But what we've done is we've extracted it and posted it on Moodle. So if you look at I don't know, the top of the Moodle page, you'll be able to find that as well as in your unit guide. Keep in mind, tutors are your resource. There's going to be a lot of questions that you have throughout the course of the semester. Don't neglect to bounce them off your tutors. They're there to help you answer questions. Again, don't forget the tutorial attendance requirement. We do rigidly enforce this. And then lastly, from here on out, your quizzes are due Monday at 10 a.m. So you want to have done your readings and given those a shot. There's no penalty for missing them all, but you have the upshot of getting some extra credit points if you happen to get some right. All right. And again, you can rewatch lectures online. And then finally, you've got an assessment task due and not all that long. So have a look at that soon. I'll talk a bit more about that later on. Okay. All right. So here's where we're at. It seems like time travel should be at least logically possible, right? We ordinarily watch bits of science fiction in which time travel occurs. It often doesn't seem to us that there's a logical problem. Yet, last time we saw there are some logical problems. We want to unravel this. These were the problems. Now let's unravel them. All right. We're going to start just somewhat indirectly. All right. And we're going to start by having a look at how David Lewis would have us think about time and see how that way of thinking about time unravels all the problems. All right. So here's the first question. What is time? All right. Seems like a good place to begin if we're asking about time travel. First thing to note about time, and about all we're going to pause to note about time, is that it's a relation among events. Time's a relation among events. What are events? Well, they're transitions, they're changes. There's the event of you entering the room, right? It begins with you taking one step that begins at some point outside the room and ends when you take another step and you get into the room. There's the event of you sitting in your chair. There's the event of you exiting the room, as you will doubtless do, and not all that long. Time is a relation among events, right? And your day so far has been constituted by a whole lot of events. There's the event of you shifting in your seat right now, the event of you sort of looking at me as I pace. There's the event, right? So, events. Time is a relation among these. What relation? Well, it's the relation we ordinarily refer to when we say that one event is earlier than another, or later than another, or simultaneous with another. All right, so time is just that relation. It's the relation we typically refer to when we think about earlier than or later than relations among events. All right, so that's time, that's events. Here's a further question to ask. What moments of time exist? All right. So events are constituted by moments of time. Which of them exist? Well, one answer is what's called the presentist answer. And the presentist says only the present exists, only now. Right? So think about now. Now you're sitting in a chair. Now you're looking forward. You're not now entering the room. You're not now waking up. You're not now exiting the room. Right? None of those times are present. There's only here, you here now looking, hopefully, towards me or towards this, paying attention. The presentist says it's only this moment of time that exists. So in a picture, we have something like this. There's just the present, and the present's moving forward. Right? A little bit ago, the present was constituted by your entrance. That ceased to be, and now what is now is you sitting here, and soon that will cease to be, and what will be now, what will be present, will be your exiting. Right? So the present is just moving forward. Right? And what precedes the present doesn't exist. What is future to the present doesn't exist on this picture. Right? So that's one way of thinking about time. All right, but here's a different way of thinking about time. All right, this is the picture that David Lewis paints for us. This is called the four-dimensionalist picture. And the idea behind four-dimensionalism is that, well, there's a fourth dimension. There's the spatial dimensions, and then there's a temporal dimension. And all moments of time exist. They're all equally real. Right? Now is real, right? You sitting here now. And there's the event of you entering the room. And the four-dimensionalist says that event is just as real. It exists just as much as this present moment does. They're on a par existentially. Similarly, you're going to leave the room at a certain point. And the four-dimensionalist says that that event, that moment of time, exists and is equally real. And it's just as real as the present moment. Okay? So here, just to add further description, the idea is that physical objects on this four-dimensional picture are spread out in time just as they're spread out in space. Right? You occupy a region of space. Right? Just look at where you are. You fill a certain region. You're spread out in that spatial region. The four-dimensionalist says, just as you're spread out in space, you're spread out in time. Okay? So if you had the God's eye perspective, someone jumping would look like that. There'd be the moment of liftoff, the increase of height, and then, well, there's no decrease of height there, but you get the point. Each moment of time exists and is equally real, and what the jumping person is the collection of all their jumping parts. Okay. before you answer this question, let me ask you, do you have any questions about these two pictures of time? All right. I'll take this as a success. I've adequately described these two views of time for you. All right, so here's a question. Turn to the person sitting nearest to you, answer it. Is time travel possible? Which view of time has to be correct? All right, go ahead. All right, I'll take it that was easy enough. Anybody would like to answer? What's that? Eternalism, yeah. Four-dimensionalist eternalism. Right, so I guess I didn't explain why this has the name eternalism. There's actually two four-dimensionalist views. I'm not getting into the other one now. One is called eternalist four-dimensionalism. It says that the entire future exists. There's another four-dimensionalist view that says the present exists and all past moments exist, but there's no future moments. Only cover so much in the present. All right, yeah. Why is it that the eternalist view has to be correct if time travel is possible? What do you need? All right, you got to get somewhere, right? If you're time traveling, there has to be a destination. On the presentist view, there is no destination, right? You can't get anywhere because there's nowhere to get to. All right, so let's suppose presentism is actually true. All right, so let's suppose that the actual world, our world, this reality, is such that only the present exists. Does that mean time travel is logically impossible? All right, so I see some people nodding, yeah, it is. That's incorrect. Was anybody inclined to the alternative answer and have a thought about why? Right, so the question is, suppose presentism is actually true. Does that mean it's logically impossible? Remember what logical impossibility has to do with? A violation of a law of logic. All right, it is a tricky one. The answer is no, time travel can still be logically possible. Because remember, just because something's logically possible doesn't mean it's physically possible. Right? So there's no contradiction, there's no violation of the law of non-contradiction, there's no violation of any other law of logic in thinking about time travel, even if presentism's true. There's only a contradiction if you suppose that presentism's true and we can actually time travel. But I asked you about the possibility of time travel. So just because we can't doesn't mean it's not in some broader sense possible. Right? There's no logical problem. So long as, and this is the important point, so long as a four-dimensionalist view is true. Right? So long as a four-dimensionalist view is, so long as a four-dimensionalist view is possible. Four-dimensionalism is possible. Time travel is logically possible, provided we could deal with all the other problems. Okay? Let's turn to the other problems. All right. So the identity problem. Remember how this goes. Spock, if he time travels, meets himself. Spock meets Spock. Wait a second. We have the law of identity, right? Leibniz's law. If two things are identical, they have everything in common. There are no differences. But if Spock meets Spock, there's going to be all kinds of differences, right? You could witness them just by looking at their images. So it seems like we have a violation of the law of identity. How do we resolve this? Well, Here's what Lewis has to say. Well, if we're thinking about time travel, we first of all have to be thinking about time on the four-dimensionalist picture, right? You have to have somewhere to go to. Now, what should we think of individuals on this four-dimensionalist view? Well, what happens in your lifespan? Well, you're born at a certain point, you grow, you reach your middle years, you continue to age, and then you die, right? That's your life. And there's all those moments that exist, and on the four-dimensional view, all those moments are equally real. Now, we could name each of these moments, right? So there's you, but there's you at your first year of life, you at your 20th, and you at every other year at which you exist. Now, is the person that you are now identical with you? Well, Lewis says, in a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. Who you are, says Lewis anyway, is the collection of all your temporal parts. Right? Remember, you're spread out in space, you're spread out in time, just as you're spread out in space, right? You're the whole enchilada, birth to death, and all those moments exist. What you are, what your name refers to, says Lewis, typically, is the whole thing. But when you time travel, it's not that you meet a part of you and you're distinct from yourself. No, what happens is just a part of you meets a part of you. Right? It's not the whole meeting the whole. It's a part meeting the part. And it's perfectly fine. There's no contradiction involved in saying that two distinct parts of you meet. All right. So the first premise, that if time travel is possible, you can be distinct from yourself, according to Lewis, isn't true. Right, so we ask the question, well, which one's Spock? Right? Spock meets Spock. Which one is he? Who is Spock? Well, the answer Lewis is going to give is, well, neither. Neither Spock. They're just Spock parts. And Spock parts can be distinct, that is, different from each other. Right? They can have differences. And so there's just no violation of the law of identity. Okay. How are you feeling with this way of resolving the problem? Do you find this intellectually satisfactory? Do you see how Lewis achieves it? All right. Okay. So, with regard to this initial problem, there is no logical contradiction. There is no violation of a law of logic. All right. One down, others to go. Two times paradox. Remember how this went? We saw the Harry Potter clip last class. It took time to time travel. That is, Harry and Hermione were moving forward in time as well as moving backwards. Well, that seems contradictory. How could you be going one way and not going that way? Here's a way of solving it. Introduce two temporal dimensions. You're going forward along one, backwards along another. That's consistent. Problem, you can never revisit exactly the same moment of the past if it takes time to time travel because you'll always be moving forward along one dimension. This picture is a bit complicated. Lewis says all the complications are unnecessary. And time travel of the sort we ordinarily think of is logically possible. Right. And here's how he gets us to appreciating this. All right, so why don't you turn the person next to you, answer this question. How is this series of objects ordered? All right. So there's an ordering here. All right, how many ways is this series of objects ordered? All All right, I've got 2 votes for 2. I've got a few other votes for 2. Good, good. What are the ways? Right, so height and shade. Can these orderings separate? Can they come apart? Can a series of objects be ordered by height and not by shade? Vice versa? Yeah, obviously they can, right? Right. Here's an example of such an ordering. It's not the same objects, or objects with the same properties in the latter two, but they come apart. And here's Lewis's point. When it comes to time travel, we have a separation between 2 ways of ordering events. Okay. What are those ways? Well, there's the temporal ordering, right? So this is one way of ordering events, right? The earlier than, later than relation. You walked in, you sat down, you'll leave, you'll grab a coffee, you'll go to your next class. Each event occurs before the other. Not the only way to order events, right? There's also what he calls personal time. Right? So there's external time, which is the ordinary temporal ordering that we think of. But then there's a causal ordering, right? So this has to do with what causes what. So think about a series of dominoes being set up. You set them up, right? We've all done this, I assume. And you knock one over, and eventually the rest fall down. Now, in our experience, the causal ordering and the temporal ordering of the collapse of the dominoes coincide, right? Temporally first, the first domino falls, and that first domino causes the second domino to fall, and the second causes a third, and the third causes a fourth, and so on. And the collapse of the first precedes in time the collapse of the second, and the collapse of the second precedes in time the collapse of the first, and so on. Right? The causal ordering, what Lewis calls personal time. And why does he call it personal? He calls it personal time because it's time as you experience it. Right? When you experience yourself in the world, you experience causes before their effects. Right? This is why we get the name personal time. But it's not personal in the sense of time as I think of it. It's personal in the sense of it's a causal ordering that he emphasizes. All right, so for the non-time traveler, for us, it's like the dominoes, right? The events that are temporally earlier are also causally earlier, with quotes, right? The causes precede the effects, right? When you get punched in the face, I don't know if you've experienced this, it's unpleasant. The punching precedes the bruising, right? Punch first, bruise later. And the cause precedes the effect, right? So causal ordering and temporal ordering go together. But for the time traveler, right, this is different. If you get punched in the face and then time travel, the cause succeeds the effect. The effect happens before the cause. Right? If you get punched in the face right before you time travel and you arrive in the past, well, then the bruising occurs first, and the punching occurs later. I'm sorry, you're probably looking at this the wrong way. Well, you can reverse. I know when I do my hand gestures, it's all, I'll try and correct it, but you get the point. You get the point. Different example. Suppose you were to hop in a time machine and draw a line down your arm, right, while you're time traveling. Well, there's the first bit of the line, and the second bit of the line, and the third bit of the line, and so on. In the causal order of things, right, the first bit causally precedes the second bit, precedes the third, and so on. But temporally, it's opposite. You finish before you begin, but in different senses, right? The last part occurs first, and the first part occurs last. But first and last are being thought of in 2 different ways, right? Causally, or in your experience, versus temporally. All right. All right, so what's Lewis' solution to this idea about time traveling taking time? It's just this. When you hop into a time machine and it seems to take time, right, you're just experiencing a certain series of cause and effect. A series of cause and effect that normally goes forward in time. But when you're time traveling, it's just reversed. You're going backwards, and you're traveling backwards, just not in a second dimension, but your experience is as if time were also going forwards. But time isn't really going forwards if you're traveling backwards. Time really is going backwards. You're just having experiences as if time were going forward. Right? So you walk into your time machine with a warm cup of coffee, and slowly it cools over the course of your journey. Seems like time's moving, but no, time's not moving forward, it's moving backwards. It's just that the causal ordering is different. Right? It's not matching the temporal ordering. All right, so this can be a confusing point. Would you like to ask any questions about this? All right. We'll bring it up in tutorials. All right. Here's a question for you. Given all of this, all that's been said, suppose we were to travel from the present to 1916, so 100 years. How long would it take you to travel that distance in time?
It would be like negative 100 years. Going backwards in time.
All right, so the answer is 100 years, maybe negative 100 if you're going backwards and you're thinking of it that way, but 100 years. If you travel back in time 100 years, it takes 100 years. That's the distance of time you've traveled. If you go back 5 years, you've traveled back 5 years. And it doesn't matter if the 100-year journey only, in your experience, takes the amount of personal time to drink a cup of coffee. You've still gone back. It's still taking you 100 years to get there. It's just that this causal ordering is different. It just appears as if it's, a 10-minute journey, supposing that's all it takes to finish your coffee. All right. Here's a different one. Grandfather paradox. The objection. If time travel is possible, then you could change the past. Well, I think that's true. Well, just suppose. All right, think Marty McFly. Think Back to the Future. You go back, you could do stuff to alter the right. If grandfather never broke his leg, you could go to the past and take a baseball bat and break his leg. Right? If you can time travel, it sure seems like you could change the past. Okay, but the worry is that that's not possible, right? Because that would require a contradiction. If grandfather never broke his leg in the past, and you break his leg in the past, then it's both true that he never broke his leg and false that he never broke his leg. That's a violation of the law of non-contradiction. And that matters in part because those two things being simultaneously true is simply inconceivable. I mean, you could say the words, but you can't coherently picture the state of affairs. Right, so this is deeply problematic. All right. Here's what Lewis has to say. And it wraps back in to our talk about different senses of possibility, different senses of can, or different senses of could. Right. Here's his example. He says, I can speak Finnish, but I can't speak Finnish. Both are true, but not in the same way. Right. When he says, I can speak Finnish, what he has in mind is the consistency, the logical consistency of one fact with a set of other facts. All right? His speaking Finnish is consistent with the fact that he exists. Right? There's no contradiction there. Both can be true. It's consistent with the fact that he has a Finnish textbook. Right? his speaking Finnish is perfectly consistent with that. That he has time to learn it is also consistent with him speaking Finnish, right? No contradiction there. That his cognitive abilities allow him to learn it, right? Also consistent, no contradiction. He can speak Finnish in this sense, right? Although he doesn't speak Finnish, he can speak it in the sense that it's a future psychological possibility for him. Given facts about his existence, his possession of a textbook, and his cognitive powers, which were non-trivial. He was a very intelligent guy. He could eventually learn to speak Finnish. Right? So in a sense, he can speak Finnish. But he says, don't you dare take me to Helsinki and ask me to interpret for you. I'm not going to be much use, because he can't speak Finnish. But this is a different sense of can when he says this. Right? All right, my slides are all out of order, but that's all right. His not speaking Finnish is consistent. Pardon me. His speaking Finnish is inconsistent, incompatible with the following set of facts, 1 through 4, which are just the facts from before, and this fifth fact, that he doesn't currently know how to speak Finnish. His speaking Finnish and his not knowing how to speak Finnish are incompatible. Right? The relationship between him speaking Finnish and his lacking that skill is incompatible in a way that his speaking Finnish is not incompatible with the previous facts, 1 through 4. Right? There's no contradiction with him speaking Finnish in 1 through 4. But there is a contradiction with him speaking Finnish in 5. And when you take that more inclusive set of facts, we get a sense in which he cannot speak Finnish. Right? So think about this as a current psychological impossibility. Right? His speaking Finnish is not a current psychological possibility. Right? So what we have here is just two senses of possibility. Right? In one sense of possibility, he can. In another sense, he can't. And we're just using can and can't in different ways. And the grandfather paradox trades on this kind of ambiguity. Right? There's a subtle slip in our thinking when we're thinking about the grandfather paradox. And it's a slip in the notions of can that are relevant. All right, so let's talk about that slip. All right. Both are true, he says. If time travel is possible, then it's possible to change the past. All right, what sense is it possible? Well, in this sense. If you suppose your grandfather grievously offended, I don't know why we're talking about killing grandfather, but this is the example, all right? Suppose your grandfather grievously harmed you, offended you, whatever, at some point in your life. Time travel becomes a possibility. The offense was so egregious that you decide grandfather should die. Right? So you go back in time. Before you go back in time, though, you do everything that's needed to kill grandfather when you get there upon arrival. So you train with a sniper rifle. You get good with knives. I don't know. You do whatever it would take. You know, you bring your Garrett. You load up. You get skilled with a set of weapons, and you get to the past. Now, there is a sense in which you can kill grandfather. You have everything it takes to kill someone, and grandfather's someone, right? You could strangle him with your Garrett. You could chop off his head with an axe on your back. You can shoot him with your sniper, whatever. You've got all that it takes, so you can. But you can't change the past. In another sense, you can't kill Grandpa. Why can't you kill Grandpa? Well, Grandpa lives, right? Grandpa gave rise to your father, who gave rise to you. We know that this is how history went down. And we know that this is how history went down because you're here. You exist. If grandfather were dead, you would not exist. So what do we know? Well, first of all, we know that you can't kill Grandpa in one sense. Given how history actually happened, grandfather survives. So we know something goes wrong, something goes awry. You kill the wrong person, right? Maybe you kill his twin that you didn't know about because the twin died very early. you killed him. Maybe you were misinformed about who your grandpa was, right? Maybe there was an adoption scenario. Maybe you shoot the guy, but you miss every vital organ, and maybe your gun jams. Maybe you lose heart. You think, oh, this is a bit overkill. He didn't really harm me that bad in life. And you go back on your earlier plans. Right? There's all kinds of things that could go wrong. And because you live, we know that something went wrong. Grandfather lives. All right. So in a sense, you can change the past, right? But not in a sense that's in this sense, you have the ability to do things that could affect changes. But given how history played out, you can't actually bring about any changes. We know that history happened one way. Let me give you another analogy for how Lewis is thinking about this. I don't know if you're footy fans. I have a little bit of difficulty appreciating the sport. Not much. I had a good time at a Swans-Hawks game. The crowd was, riotous. It was a very close game. It was a couple years ago. It was a good game. And I could see someone who loves the sport thinking that would be a game to see in person. Right? And suppose the person is such a fan of the sport that they always regret not having attended that game. Right? Suppose time travel becomes a possibility. Right? So they go back in time and attend the game. Have they changed anything? Well, Lewis would say, not at all. It's always true that they attended the game. They didn't change the past. It was always true in the past that they attended the game. If you were to look very carefully on the film footage, you'd see them sitting in the stands, right? Even before, I was going to say even before they time traveled, but right. So after the game, you look at the recordings, you still see them in the stands, even though they don't time travel for some time later. Okay. There's been no changes. There's been activity in the past that the time traveler engaged in. He did stuff. He attended a game. But there's been no changes. All right. So, pushback. Okay. Now, you might think, and some people, and this is a very natural thought to come to mind, how in the world could I get to the past and be prohibited from killing Grandpa? I mean, really, is absolutely everything I'm going to attempt fail? Right? If I've got the axe and he's standing right there, I mean, how in the world can I be prevented from bringing it down on Grandpa? Well, the story is just the story I alluded to a moment ago. We know something's going to go wrong. Right? We know that you're going to lose heart. Grandpa's going to dodge your swing. Something will go awry. And what we have to distinguish, says Aubrey Townsend, in thinking about this, is that it's not that traveling to the past prohibits you from doing things. You could do all sorts of things if you travel to the past. You could attend footy games. You can harm people. You could drink coffees. You can engage the world as much as you do now. It's not as though you're going to be like a ghost floating in time. No. You'll be a real presence. You'll be really interacting with things and people. It's just that you won't be able to change anything. If you drink a cup of coffee after time traveling, it will always have been true that you drank that cup of coffee. If you harm someone while time traveling, it will always be true that you harmed that person. If you watch a footy game, it will always have been true that you watched it. Don't confuse the ability to do stuff with the ability to change. Well, these are different things. And if time travel is possible, what you do have is the ability to do stuff, to drink coffees, to attend games, to harm people, etc. What you don't have is the ability to make the past different. All right. How is this with you guys? Do you find this an acceptable solution to the grandfather paradox? All right, so what you should notice is that this portrait of time travel is not the portrait you get on every time travel story you encounter. Right? This is not the portrait you get when you watch Back to the Future. When you watch Back to the Future, you're seeing a bit of fiction that involves changing the past. Right? This is inconsistent. Right? This is logically incoherent. But not every time travel story is like that. The time travel story I introduced you to last time, I didn't introduce it to you, you've all seen it, Harry and Hermione. If you pay attention to the story, how it plays out, you'll see no change occurs. The Harry Potter story is a perfectly logically consistent time travel story. All right, so kudos to J.K. Rowling there. Last problem. Dealing with causal loops. Remember how this went? We started off with this principle. We called it the principle of sufficient reason. It goes like this. Every contingent feature of the world has an explanation for why it is. Right? So if the length of your hair, it is a certain length. There's a reason your hair is that length. Right? It has to do with how fast your hair grows when you got your last haircut. The fact that your hair is a certain length does not explain why your hair is that length. Right? So we can't appeal to the fact to be explained, to explain that very fact. That's circular, it's bad, that's not a genuine explanation. But if time travel is possible, we seem committed to there being circular explanations of events. So you'll recall from last time the example went like this. You can imagine somebody having the ability to build a time machine because they're given plans and they've got the skills. Okay? But what could explain their ability to build it? Well, here's one way things could go. The plans that they use are given to them by someone who drew them up on the basis of the time machine they built. Right, so their ability to build the time machine with those plans explains their ability to build the time machine with those plans. Right, so that's a violation of the principle of sufficient reason together with this ban on circular explanations. And here's what Lewis has to say about this particular problem. All right, premise 2 is false. Okay. Here's what you have in these causal loops. Every individual event is explained by another individual event. All right, so someone has the ability to build a time machine because they're given plans. The plans come from the future, and the plans from the future are based on the time machine that was built. Right, so each event is explained by the preceding event. So every individual event has an explanation, but the whole thing lacks an explanation. And what Lewis says is, we really shouldn't be too fussed about this. Why shouldn't we be too fussed about this? Well, when it comes to certain features of the world, just some of them lack an explanation. So theists, for example, people who think God exists, they've long, or at least classical theists, have long acknowledged that God's existence is the sort of thing which, if true, has no non-circular explanation. They've maintained that God exists a se, as in himself. He explains his own existence, and there's nothing to appeal to beyond God for his existence. So for theists, this will just be a familiar idea. For non-theists, this should be a familiar idea too, right? If you're not a theist, you think that you should still think that there are laws of nature, right? The laws of nature have nothing to do with God. And they are a certain way, right? There is a certain description of how the physical world behaves that's correct, right? There's a reason why when you release a pin from your hand, it goes down and not up. And the fundamental laws of nature explain the behavior of these sorts of things. The laws of nature are a certain way. But if there's no God to bring about the laws of nature, then there's no explanation for why the laws of nature are the way that they are. They just are. All right, so here we have right, it could have been otherwise. It could have been, logically, this is logical possibility here. It's logically possible that you could release a pin and it flies to the ceiling. Right? Right, that's not physically possible because the laws of nature prohibit that. But it's a way things could have been. It's not how things are. And there's no explanation for why we have the set of laws that we do governing our universe. They just are what they are. So again, we have a contingent feature of the world, the laws of nature, lacking a non-circular explanation. So when it comes to time travel, if you're deeply moved by this objection, then you have to realize that it's an objection to a whole lot else besides. Right? This is an objection that let me put it differently. Somewhere in your view of the world, you're going to be committed to seeing things as having no further explanation. Eventually, explanations come to a stop. And if eventually explanations come to a stop somewhere, then it's hard to see why we should say they can't come to a stop with these kinds of loops involved in time travel. That's the basic point. All right. Any reactions to this way of solving the problem? Just flat out denying a premise? All right. So I'll leave you to think about the last problem involving foreknowledge and fatalism. We'll come back to fatalism next week, so I'm not shrugging it off entirely. But here's what you'll see. We start off with a set of problems, some hard problems, some really confusing problems. And Lewis, quite elegantly, shows that all the logical problems can be dealt with. Right? Now, he doesn't show us that time travel is actually possible. Right? For time travel to actually be possible, physics has to permit it, and we need to look to what physicists have to say about that. That's not what philosophers are in the business of doing. What we're in the business of doing is thinking about logic. We're not the only people who are in the business. Mathematicians and others are. But we are also in the business. And Lewis says, when you look at things right, you should be able to appreciate that time travel is indeed a logical possibility. There is no violation of any logical principle. This principle of logic involved in conceiving of time travel. Some time travel stories are inconsistent, but not all. All right. So next class, what we're going to take up is the idea of free will, determinism. Do we freely act? Can we make sense of that on a deterministic view of the world? And some related things besides. So I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have fun at your tutorials. Bring your questions to your tutors. They're going to be a great resource for you. Don't forget to have a look at your assessment task. Actually, no. I was just clicking this.
Oh, you want forwarding?
No.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. Well, they do have those. I don't know how to set them up. I don't know if they're Mac PC compatible.
Yeah.
But that is. I need to get a clicker or something because it would be nice to not have to.
Because I can control my telephone.
Oh, yeah,
I think
yeah.
it'd be easy to do this. I will look into it.
If there's an elegant way of doing it that's not, that's not complicated, that would be nice. Does anyone have to buy? The reason I don't have a clicker is I just don't want to buy one. A decent one costs like $100.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah, the quizzes aren't. We don't have any quizzes, so they're shared. Oh no, not negatively. They're all.